So David, thank you for sitting down. We want to try something new. We wanted to try having a conversation right after you finish sharing what you shared with all of us, so that we could catch, you only get 25 minutes or so to talk, and we want to zoom in on some moments that were powerful and that mattered, and there were a few already. So, but first, thank you for sitting down. Yeah. We're beginning the Uncommon Ground series, and I just want to get to this right at the outset for group leaders who are watching, for groups that are watching at any given time. You talked about how you realize we need to talk about this. You thought about even bumping this past election so it didn't get mistaken for political, which we get that. How did you finally land on, we need to talk about this, it's time, we can't keep going on, let's go?
Yeah, I think, Dave, for me, this is a big issue. And it's not just a big issue for me, it's a big deal in our country. And I am very concerned about where we are as a nation. And so I said in the message, my tendency in the past was always just stay quiet whenever, especially there were racial issues, and figure that's not my place. And silence is support, and realize that some silence isn't support. Silence is neglect. And so just feeling like, and again, just feeling God nudging and saying, man, David, we got to get in the game here. And if we don't, then we're going to be guilty of whatever happens in a negative way down the road that we didn't step in. And so it really was that nudge from God, and saying it's time to do something. Yeah. So. Now
you dove right in. I feel like this metaphor that you drew was so powerful because it caught my attention. And you talked about how you've sat in your office and seen couples on the brink, or they're not coming back. Divorce is probably imminent. And then you related it to our country and the feeling. Take us back to that, because that for me was powerful, hearing that, thinking through that as a metaphor. What do you see? What have you seen in couples when you've sat there? And then how are you seeing some of that play out, at least somewhat, in our country and in social media and newscast and so on?
So what I saw with couples, Dave, is back to the whole saying that words matter, and the words we use with each other matter. And so I would watch couples, I would listen to couples as they're sitting there, and they would begin to, and it's as their feelings, the intensity would rise, and they would say things to each other. You just go, oh, you're not going to be able to take that back, or you can apologize for it, but the cut is already there. And then they weren't pulling, the things they were saying weren't pulling them together. Instead, it just kept pulling them further and further apart. And at some point, somebody's got to go, okay, I'm going to stop doing this, and I'm not going to talk this way anymore, and begin to pull the couple back together. And when that wasn't happening in those sessions, you just go, it's not going to end anywhere in a good place, because pride, arrogance gets in there and go, I'm not going to be the one to give in. And I've said this before when it comes to Ruth and I, when we have arguments, I know how to end every single argument just like that if I want. If I will just suck my pride up and go over and give her a hug, it can end like that. And in my stupidity, sometimes I'll let it go minutes or sometimes hours or sometimes days, because I don't want to give in. And I saw that in couples happening, and I see that in our country right now. And our leaders are just going this way, and the rhetoric keeps getting more and more hyped, and the things that are being said. And then you wonder, why do people not respect our leaders? Well, how could they? It's not even the decisions our leaders are making. It's what everybody else is saying about our leaders on both sides. And we're not as far apart as everybody acts, but the rhetoric is taking us further apart. And at some point, it's going to be too wide, and there's not going to be any way to pull it back. And so somebody somewhere has to say, okay, wait a minute, time out, and start pulling us back. And I don't expect the leaders to do it. And so I think we as a church, I think that's what God's calling us to do.
Well, and it's what I hear you saying in that is it's humility has to jump that gap. And you're talking about you and Ruth. And so I can end this if I humbly stop with this posture of, maybe it's pride or arrogance or whatever, I'm going to win this argument, and I can step back in and remember I love you. And that's what was so powerful for me when you related it from marriage to our country, is this recognition of like, how I went back in the mindset of like, you think of 9/11 and how rallying the people were. There was no doubt. And you see pictures that move us to tears of seeing them rallying together. It didn't matter your political affiliation, your race, your gender, whatever. It was rallying on behalf of a cause of we're united in this and we love one another. And then you go, wait, how are we saying the things we're saying to one another? Have we forgotten? And that was a while back, but have we forgotten?
And Dave, you read stuff on it. So I'm not on social media at all, but my practice every morning when I wake up, and I wake up often about 4 o'clock, and so I pull out my phone, and I know you're not supposed to do that, but I do. And I'll go through news feeds, and I go through 2 of them. I go through Fox News because I want to see what that side's saying, and I go through CNN and their feed to see what they're saying. And you look at the rhetoric and people calling each other devils and Satan, and it's just like, okay, so either side is so extremely bad, and at some point you got to go, wait a minute, okay, I don't agree with you, but you're a good person still.
We can disagree,
but
but we don't have to dishonor.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so it's just getting awful. And then just to make sure, to clarify, after I read those feeds, then I do my Bible reading and I say, okay, what does Jesus say?
Right.
And so anyway, that's kind of my practice in the morning.
Probably a strong clarifying moment of contrast Jesus.
Yeah, exactly.
So I want to take us to for a moment, because you shared the on-the-spot moments are the ones that are unnerving for us. And you just talked about how, like, this past week, you knew you were going to this meeting. You chose to go to the meeting. You responded to the invitation. You knew that you would be sharing about racial injustice and the civil unrest in our nation. And yet you're still feeling something inside, like we all probably are, not wanting him or her to, if she gets to the meeting early, or if he gets to the meeting early and corners me on this issue, how am I going to respond? How am I going to feel? How did you feel even knowing that was coming? How did you feel knowing you were going to have to share? Even trying to hope that there's a safe space. I hope it's safe. You see what I'm saying? It's so uneasy. How did you feel? Well,
see, that's back to the rhetoric thing again. And I think that we've gotten to a point somehow, Dave, where we can't say something and be wrong about it. It's almost like in our society right now, you have to be right or you're totally wrong.
Yes.
And I'm going to say, and I do say lots of things that are wrong, but it may be in my journey that, okay, at this point, that's all I knew. But if I go a little bit further, I'll learn, that was probably the wrong thing to say. And so there's got to be a lot of grace there. But going into that meeting, it was with national leaders, and there were probably, out of the 14 or 15 of us, 6 of us maybe that were white, the others were all black. And man, they had been involved in this whole racial injustice thing for so long. And I'm just thinking, here I am from central Pennsylvania, where we're 90% white and our church is 90-something% white. And what do I possibly have to say? And so even as I started, I just said, I just need, I'm new to the game. I'm learning here. This is what I see. But I try to be very humble in it and say I could be wrong. But as I look at this, it's what it appears to me. What's interesting though, sometimes even around the church, Dave, we'll talk about when we get a new staff person on the team, we like them to tell us what they see, because when you're in the game for a long time, you don't see some of your blind spots anymore. And so I also went into that meeting going, okay, I'm new to this game, but I might have some fresh eyes at some people. So I felt like there was benefit from my being there. I was going to benefit greatly, but I thought I could add value as well. So.
I love how you started that when you said, this is where I'm at in my journey. That's what you encouraged us. I think even you said in your assumptions about where we are, that we're flawed people. I'm assuming, and I'm coming at this potentially flawed, and I'm not going to hold this as, like you said, you got to be right all the time or else you may be canceled by one side or the other or whatever. But that powerful understanding, and I think it's safe to say you want this for our groups, to be able to come in and say, and we're safe in our journey. We're all somewhere in our journey. My hope is that we would make it safe. And that's what I want to ask about is how can, and maybe that's part of it, how can we make this a safe conversation to start standing on uncommon ground in our groups? Because it feels like this needs to start, and you even shared it needs to start with us. How can we make it safe? And maybe it's that thing right there, the assumption that, hey, we're all in somewhere in our journey.
So one thing that's interesting, Dave, as you even talk about that, we hesitated about even having this discussed in groups because we go, do we trust our groups enough? Do we trust people in the groups not to say something stupid? Because we know this is volatile. And so there's positions everywhere. And if we all come at this with our positions and you're different than mine, and then I have to prove you wrong and me right, it's going to be a nasty thing in our groups. And so we didn't want that. And so I think it's coming at it with a sense of humility. We talked about that earlier. I think it's coming at it with a sense of grace of going, okay, well, that's your opinion. I don't see it quite that way, but help me understand why. And that's part of what happened in this group that I was in last week. There were some people that said some things that I just go, I don't see that at all. So then the benefit was to be able to say, so I'm not seeing that. Help me understand why you feel that way, where you're getting that. And here's why I see it the way I do. And it's developing that relational trust and equity to be able to say, man, don't see it the same way you do. But it's just being careful with our words. It's not allowing the rhetoric to get too strong, too high, and not drawing lines in the sand. I think that's what we do. And I've talked about this with parents that are struggling with teenagers and sons and daughters in their teens, and the dad's ready to throw the daughter out or the son out. And I say, man, don't burn any bridges right now. And they may be doing something totally stupid, but in 5 years, 10 years, they're going to come back. And if you've drawn a line in the sand, if you burn the bridge, they can't come back anymore. And that's part of what I worry about for our country is we're drawing lines in the sand and we're burning bridges behind us that at some point we're not going to be able to come back. And so let's be careful.
Well, I hear you in that. That's the powerful, again, the metaphor is so powerful about parents and their teens. And I think my kids are 11 and 9. They're not there yet. But the idea of, have you made it a safe place for me to journey? dad or mom or parent or guardian. And so for us to make it a safe space to journey. And so we're leaning into and saying, okay, we're going to give you this space and trust you to talk about this, to give people a safe space to journey together.
And Dave, somebody's going to say something in the group that's going to make you furious. It's going to make you mad. If you could, you'd reach over and you'd strangle them right there. And that's what you're going to want to do with your kids as they get into their teen years. But you don't, hopefully. And you go, okay, they're in their journey. Let's let them keep progressing and let's talk about it, but let's not ruin the relationship.
And I want to lean in on that quickly, and then we'll close here in just a moment. How is it as a follower of Jesus? Because you read Jesus' words, and that's what was so powerful. You challenge us to, hey, this isn't what I'm saying. You have to argue with Jesus on this. Yeah. How is it that we so easily, in a moment, like you're talking about, somebody says something, and how is it that I miss and start to justify dishonor when I'm a follower of Jesus and I know what he's forgiven me of, I know how he looks at me and how he loves me? How do we we leapfrog Jesus' words? What is going on? I mean, you've done this. I'm sure we all have. We're flawed. You talk about that. It's something that bothers me is when I step back and go, how did I do that? Why did I leapfrog? What's going on in our hearts and our minds? How are we so quick to leapfrog Jesus' words and then argue with them later? I was justified.
Yeah. So as Christians, you know what I think we do, Dave? We take other parts of the Bible and we elevate them to be the highest thing. And we assume that some other part of Scripture is the most important thing. And so if you're not agreeing with me on that, then I'm going to fight for that to the end, where Jesus just said it when he said, this is the essence of everything. And so he said, there's nothing higher than this right here. And we tend to try to elevate other things above that. And it's not just followers of Jesus that do that. Everybody does that where it's my way and it's better and bigger than everything else. Even what was interesting in these relations in the group talking about race and racial injustice. And for some, that had become the highest issue of all things. And this was faith leaders. And so you almost had to come back and say, okay, this is incredibly important, but Jesus is first. And so let's be careful we don't get it out of whack. And so, but it's so easy to elevate other things above our relationships with each other.
Yeah. And so I would love for you to finish and just share with us, share with groups, what is your hope for us as we are entering into conversations that you said could be volatile? We knew going in, we knew coming into this they could be. What would be your hope for us as we lead into uncommon ground groups? What we establish there, or what it is to stand on uncommon ground together. Yeah.
So I hope, again, there's civility in the groups as we have these discussions. I hope you don't get nasty with each other. And when you disagree with each other, then do it graciously. But I also hope, it's kind of what we talk about all the time around the church, that we each take our next step. And so what was cool about that meeting last week for me is that person that had been in the fight for 50 years, they had a next step. They had some place that they could go on to. And here I am 3 months into the whole thing, and there's a next step for me as well. And my steps may be bigger, and I might be able to go faster because I've got so much ground to make up. But each and every one of us can take another step. And so I know we talk about it around the church all the time, but each of us taking our next step to understand what it means to love people that are not in our groups. And so what that may mean, and maybe the biggest challenge for us of anything, Dave, is finding people that aren't in our in-groups. And especially when it comes to race, because Lancaster and central Pennsylvania is so white. How do we reach out? And so, and we've got to be careful that we don't do stupid things trying to get other people in, but it doesn't even have to be. I think LCBC is very diverse as a church. We're not racially, because there aren't that many different races in central Pennsylvania, but socioeconomically, I mean, as far as there's just educationally, all kinds of diversity. And so even if it's just that, sitting down with somebody that is at a different level of education as you, or a different economic situation than you, or whatever it may be, and let's just talk and let's learn to appreciate each other.
And especially without intent to do anything other than listen. To be able to hear and tell me more about that, as opposed to, I disagree, and now let me tell you how I disagree. And maybe just being able to listen and say, we're in a different part of our journey, and I'll give you the grace to be in your part of the journey, because I know I need you to give me the grace to be where I'm at.
And you saying that makes me wish I'd said this now in the message. The whole goal of this is for each of us to learn and love more. But if we go into it and if I think, okay, I'm going to change you so I can love you more, then we've missed the whole point of this. And so if each of us go in and say, okay, what can I learn so I can love people more, not what can I do to change other people, then I think we're going to win. If we go into this thinking, how can I change everybody else in my group to think the way I am, it's going to be a disaster.
And that's the heart, uncommon ground, week 1. I'm so grateful that Pastor David would sit down with us and let that be the heartbeat. I'm not trying to change you. I'm trying to give safe space to grow, and we can all become more like Jesus.